So imagine you're walking into this freezing gray Rust Belt town, and you've got nothing on you but a canvas backpack and like a super worn out pair of boots.
Right, just totally exposed to the elements.
Exactly. You've spent your very last few dollars just to get there. And you walk up to a group of people on a street corner, and you're offering nothing but a listening ear, maybe a quiet prayer. And what do? They openly, brutally mock you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they just lay into you.
Yeah, they throw words designed to completely humiliate you, and passersby are joining in, smirking, treating you like you're just this total nuisance.
I mean, the natural human instinct there, the instinct almost every single one of us has, is to defend ourselves, right?
Oh, 100%. You want to argue back, you want to protect your ego, or, at the very least, you storm off, totally consumed by resentment.
Replaying the argument in your head in the shower later.
Yes, we've all done that. But today, we're taking a deep dive into a text that asks a really, really uncomfortable question. What happens when your life's purpose looks entirely like failure?
Like, what happens when you strip away that romantic, cinematic version of a calling?
Right, and you're just left with the grueling, unglamorous, and often, frankly, humiliating reality of serving other people.
So, for this deep dive, we're dissecting the transition from the first book to the second book in the Road Called Purpose series.
And for those who are just jumping in, this source material follows Warner DeVales, right? A man who is quite literally walking across America.
Yeah, exactly. So the first book tracks his journey from California to Chicago. But the second book, which is our main focus today, tracks his path from Chicago, heading east toward New York.
And we should clarify, he is not a traditional preacher, like at all.
No, not at all. He doesn't have a pulpit, he has no congregation, no marketing team, no safety net.
Just a guy with a backpack.
Right. He's a drifter who feels this divine call to serve the broken and the discarded people on the margins of society.
And the contrast between the first book and the second is wild. You have these sweeping, dramatic victories early on, and then suddenly he hits this gritty, hostile environment in the Rust Belt.
It really provides this fascinating psychological blueprint, for anyone trying to sustain their conviction in a world that is actively pushing back.
Totally. And for you listening right now, think about the era we live in. We are in an age of absolute digital overload.
Oh, completely. Constant noise.
Yeah, constant noise, notification dings all day long. We have these wildly superficial connections where, a double tap on a photo is considered a meaningful interaction.
Which is pretty sad when you really think about it.
It is. And our metrics for success are so skewed toward visibility and scale. Like, if we do something good, we want it documented. We want the analytics to prove our impact.
Right. We want the receipt for a good deed.
Exactly. And Warner DeVales is the ultimate countercultural antithesis to that mindset. It forces us to evaluate what it actually means to rely on physical presence.
Slowing down to a literal walking pace.
Right. Looking a stranger in the eye and taking on their burdens without expecting anything in return.
Before we really get into the anatomy of this journey, we should probably set some ground rules for how we're analyzing this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Lay it out for us. So, the source text is unapologetically rooted in Christian faith and scripture.
The Bible is literally the map Warner uses to navigate his cross-country trek.
But our goal today isn't to preach, right?
Exactly. Our objective for this deep dive is to impartially unpack the human experiences, the psychological struggles, and those profound lessons of empathy in the narrative.
Because, pain and shame and the desperate need for redemption, those aren't exclusive to any one theology.
No, they form the baseline of the human condition. So whether you as the listener share Warner's worldview or you're approaching this from a purely secular standpoint, the underlying mechanics of human suffering are identical.
Okay, so to really feel the gravity of the shift that happens when he leaves Chicago in Book 2, we have to establish the baseline from Book 1.
Right, the anatomy of his original calling.
Yeah, and his journey really coalesces in the American Southwest. Specifically in Gallup, New Mexico, he limps into the secondhand shop called Rudy's Resale.
Because his boots are completely destroyed at this point.
Exactly. They are physically deteriorating under the sheer mileage. So Rudy, the shop owner, hands Warner a pair of heavy, broken-in boots. And we find out these boots actually belong to an ex-convict.
Yeah, a guy who had walked out of prison, stepped into his freedom, and just left them behind for the next guy who might need them.
And the symbolic weight of that is just incredible.
It really is. The physical weight of those boots mirrors the psychological burden Warner is choosing to shoulder. He is literally stepping into the shoes of the broken.
I love that. He's not bringing judgment. He's bringing grace.
Exactly. Because in literature, what we're often symbolizes our grounding, how we interact with the reality of the earth beneath us.
Right. And ex-con's boots carry that invisible residue of confinement and mistakes.
Yeah, a debt paid to society. So by lazing them on, Warner establishes this posture of profound non-judgmental solidarity. He's on the ground level of human frailty.
And that solidarity gets tested almost immediately. We get these interwoven storylines with Jaya and Caleb.
Oh, that whole sequence is intense.
Super intense. So Jaya is this fierce young woman driving an old turquoise pickup. And she is entirely consumed by grief and rage because her brother was murdered.
And the justice system completely failed her.
Right, no accountability at all. So when Warner meets her, she's driving back to a reservation in Red Rock, and she literally has a handgun sitting on the passenger seat.
She's planning to execute the people responsible.
Yeah. She's seeking that closure that trauma tricks us into believing violence can actually provide.
Well, the psychology of revenge is incredibly complex. When you experience a profound injustice, especially the violent loss of a loved one, your brain's locus of control is just shattered.
The world doesn't feel safe anymore.
Exactly. So taking a weapon and planning vengeance, it's rarely about philosophical justice. It's a desperate psychological attempt to regain agency. She's using that gun as a false shield of control.
And then Warner ends up in her passenger seat, and his reaction just completely subverts what any of us would do.
He doesn't try to physically disarm her.
No. And he doesn't give her some self-righteous lecture about the moral failings of murder either. He simply sits with her at a Dry Creek bed right there in the dust.
He acts as a circuit breaker. Because if someone is vibrating with that frequency of rage, meeting them with equal force usually just amplifies the hostility.
Well, right, you just escalate the situation.
Yeah.
But Warner introduces this totally non-anxious presence. He helps her realize her brother's memory can be a foundation to build a future on.
Instead of a grave she's digging for herself.
Exactly. And his quiet presence just dismantles her rage. She literally leaves the gun in the dirt. But then the tension ratchets right back up because we meet Caleb.
Right, the outlaw biker.
Yeah, he's embedded in this violent gang called the Black Irons. And when they start harassing Warner and Jaya under a highway overpass, Caleb actually breaks ranks.
Which is a huge deal in that culture.
Oh, totally. He steps in to defend them, and he takes a brutal, life-threatening beating from his own gang members because of it.
Because Caleb's action represents this violent rupture of tribal loyalty. For an outlaw biker, the gang isn't just a social circle, it's an entire identity structure.
A surrogate family, basically.
Yeah, and a survival mechanism. To step between his brothers and a stranger requires a total collapse of that identity.
And that collapse culminates in Rolla, Missouri. They get trapped in a cinder block community center while this massive double tornado tears the town apart.
The tornado acts as this visceral externalization of the chaos churning inside Caleb. Stripped of his gang and his pride, he has this profound spiritual awakening in the dark.
And then, after spending a week clearing rubble, Jaya and Caleb are actually baptized together and get married in St. Louis.
And Warner just leaves them handwritten notes and slips quietly back onto the highway.
Okay, I have to pause here. I really need to push back on the text for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If we're analyzing this critically, this whole arc feels incredibly cinematic, like almost overly neat. It borders on a Hollywood script.
You think it's too sanitized?
I do. The angry woman just drops her weapon. The violent biker discovers a heart of gold, survives a perfectly timed natural disaster, and then they literally ride off into the sunset married.
I see what you mean.
Like, in the real world, complex trauma like a murdered sibling or a lifetime of gang indoctrination, that doesn't just evaporate because a nice drifter sits in the dirt with you.
That is a completely fair point.
To a skeptical listener, it risks feeling naive. How does the text handle the actual messiness of human pain?
Well, your skepticism is totally warranted. If the story framed Warner as this magical figure who just eradicated their trauma, it would be a huge misrepresentation of psychology.
Right, it would feel fake.
But a closer reading reveals that Warner doesn't actually fix anything directly. He doesn't resurrect Jaya's brother. He doesn't magically heal Caleb's psychological scars from the beating.
Okay, so what is his actual role then?
The text positions Warner merely as a catalyst. Think of chemistry. A catalyst lowers the activation energy required for a reaction to occur without being consumed by the reaction itself.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks. Yeah, Warner lowers their defensive barriers through extreme, unthreatening empathy. He holds up a mirror to their pain and points them to a higher power to begin the slow work of actual healing.
So the baptism and the marriage aren't the end of their trauma.
Exactly. They are merely the starting line of a new, healthier coping mechanism.
Okay, that makes the transition into book 2 make a lot more sense. Because if book 1 gave us this sweeping, dramatic narrative, book 2 completely strips all of that away.
The honeymoon period ends abruptly.
Yes. The source material literally warns the reader. It states, quote, "Some roads don't begin with hope. They begin in the dark. They begin in alleys that smell like regret, where people are used to being passed by."
That's such a heavy quote.
It sets the tone perfectly. Warner reaches Chicago, and the adrenaline of the Southwest is just gone. He wakes up to this freezing wind off Lake Michigan, totally exhausted.
He has a very real crisis of doubt here. He's questioning if his mission is even sustainable.
Which is so human.
It is. This is the moment the Passion Project collides with reality. In any major life endeavor, psychologists call it the honeymoon phase. Dopamine and adrenaline mask the friction of the commitment.
But when he hits Chicago, those neurochemicals are totally depleted.
Right. The environment changes from these sun-baked horizons to the claustrophobic, gray, freezing concrete of the Rust Belt. He's asking, do I still have the strength for this? Is this actually making a difference?
And he doesn't get some dramatic sign from the heavens. He finds his anchor in the wind rustling the pages of his Bible, specifically Mark 16.15 and John 20.21.
As the Father has sent me, I am sending you.
Yeah. So he ties those heavy ex-con boots tight, writes "Going East" on a piece of cardboard, and walks into this totally brutal new landscape.
Brutal is the right word. Because that's not just the weather. The ethical environment is harsh, too.
Let's talk about Elkhart, Indiana. This scene is so frustrating to read.
The wage theft incident.
Yes. Warner is at a soup kitchen, and there's a rumor about a one-day labor job paying $50 a man. So Warner and these desperate day laborers show up at 5 a.m.
And they do grueling physical labor all day long.
moving heavy furniture, just exhausting themselves. And at the end of the day, the boss tells them to wait, gets in his truck, and literally drives away. He completely scams them.
He robs men who are already at the absolute bottom of the economic ladder.
And the men react with understandable fury. They're kicking boxes, screaming. Some are literally crying because that $50 was the difference between eating and starving.
But Warner doesn't join the riot.
No. He opens his Bible to Ephesians 4.31-32, which is about putting away bitterness and anger.
And the reaction from the other laborers is immediate and hostile. One guy just spits out, "Faith don't pay."
Which, in their immediate material reality, he is absolutely correct. Faith does not put food in a stomach.
Right. The abstract concept of spiritual peace feels like a cruel insult when your labor was just stolen.
And here's where I really want to scrutinize Warner's response. The men are furious. Warner reaches into his own backpack, pulls out his own deeply needed funds, and hands 2 $100 bills to the angriest men.
He tells them, grace gives more than expected.
I mean, if I'm reading this through a modern lens, I'm just frustrated. Reaching into your own depleted survival funds to hand over cash feels like financial suicide masked as piety.
You're wondering why he doesn't go to the police.
Exactly. Why doesn't he help them organize and demand their wages? Isn't pursuing justice a far more practical form of grace? Why enable a corrupt employer to get away with theft?
That is the exact tension the author is deliberately playing with. In a purely secular, systemic view, Warner's action is entirely illogical. It ignores the structural injustice.
Completely.
However, the text is operating on a different philosophical axis. Warner isn't trying to solve the systemic labor issues of Elkhart. He is addressing the immediate psychological rot occurring within those two men.
You mean the bitterness?
Yes. Justice addresses the perpetrator to balance the external scales. Grace, in this theological context, addresses the victim's internal decay. Warner recognizes the stolen $50 is damaging, but the seed of absolute bitterness taking root is fatal.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of it like that. The bitterness would just poison them.
It would follow them home, hollow them out. By introducing this radical, illogical generosity, Warner creates a cognitive dissonance that short-circuits their rage. It disrupts the narrative that the world is entirely comprised of predators and prey.
He pays an exorbitant personal cost just to disrupt their descent into cynicism. That requires an incredible amount of internal security.
Which is tested even further down the road in Goshen, Indiana.
Oh, the rejection scene. He walks into town, and people are literally physically shutting their doors as he walks by. He approaches a group just to ask if they need a prayer, and they immediately mock him.
They tell him to take his Bible and get out. They launch deeply personal insults meant to wound his pride.
And the hostility is contagious. People walking by join in the mockery.
The psychology of public rejection is devastating. Our evolutionary survival once depended on group acceptance. When a community collectively turns on you, your brain interprets that social rejection with the exact same neural pathways it uses to process physical pain.
That makes so much sense. The instinct is to fight back, loudly defend your character.
In our modern digital landscape, it's the equivalent of a public cancellation. The reflex is to issue a 10-part statement defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you.
But Warner's response is a masterclass in emotional regulation. He doesn't argue. He recalls Luke 9.5, if a town does not welcome you, leave and physically shake the dust off your feet.
Such a powerful visual.
He walks to the town limits, prays for mercy over the city that just humiliated him, physically brushes the dirt from his boots, and keeps walking. He refuses to participate in the economy of outrage.
That act of shaking the dust is actually a profound cognitive behavioral technique.
Really? How so?
Well, when we experience hostility, we ruminate. We carry the dust of that interaction with us. We replay the argument, thinking of clever comebacks. We let those people live rent-free in our minds.
Constantly altering our future behavior out of fear.
Exactly. By physicalizing the release of resentment, Warner is establishing a psychological boundary. He's telling his brain, the toxicity of this town belongs to this town. I will not carry it into the next zip code.
True conviction requires you to maintain your character regardless of external validation. Your purpose cannot be contingent on applause.
That is the core lesson of Book 2.
So if Book 1 was a road trip movie with a triumphant soundtrack, Book 2 is a gritty, handheld documentary. The journey is an unglamorous grind, but facing external hostility is only half the battle.
Right, the internal battle is much worse.
The most dangerous threat to his calling is the internal erosion caused by compassion fatigue, the sheer exhaustion of carrying everyone's emotional weight.
Because empathy is a heavy element. To genuinely listen to someone's pain requires you to partially absorb it. You process their grief through your own nervous system.
And without boundaries, that leads to profound emotional depletion, which we see clearly when he reaches South Bend, Indiana.
The scene on the footbridge.
Yeah, the text paints this super moody, overcast picture. A man is sitting completely alone on a bridge, staring down into the dark, swirling river. His body language screams defeat.
And when Warner approaches, the man articulates a feeling that resonates deeply with modern anxieties.
He tells Warner he feels completely left behind by life. Like everyone else got the memo on how to build a career, find love, be happy, and he just missed the meeting.
He's putting in the effort, but seeing zero returns.
And the text anchors this to Galatians 6.9.
Yeah.
Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up.
That verse operates on two levels. It speaks directly to the universal human tendency to quit right before the breakthrough.
Our society has totally conditioned us to expect linear, immediate progress.
Oh, absolutely. We put in a month of work at the gym and expect a transformed physique. We go to therapy for 3 weeks and expect our trauma to vanish.
And when the harvest doesn't materialize on our timeline, we assume the effort was wasted.
We succumb to weariness. Warner tries to shift the man's perspective, explaining that God operates on a timeline that rarely aligns with human impatience.
Waiting isn't wasted time. Sometimes the work is happening beneath the soil.
Right. But the profound irony here is that the man delivering this advice is on the verge of physical collapse himself.
Warner is preaching endurance, but his own biology is giving out. Just down the road in Granger, Indiana, the accumulated toll breaks him.
His vision blurs. His breathing gets erratic.
This isn't just needing a cup of coffee. This is systemic exhaustion. He literally stumbles along the shoulder of the road and completely collapses near a farm fence, losing consciousness.
It is the most vulnerable we see Warner in the entire narrative. The anchor is suddenly incapacitated.
And then a 12-year-old boy spots him, runs to his grandparents, and they rescue him. They load this filthy drifter into their truck, put him in a sunlit room, and nurse him for 3 days.
No background checks, no calling the authorities, just pure charity.
It's a total subversion of the savior dynamic. Warner's whole identity is being the helper. What does it do to someone's psychology when they suddenly have to rely entirely on strangers?
For individuals with a helper complex, receiving care is often more psychologically difficult than giving it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because accepting help requires you to relinquish control and admit insufficiency. It demands immense humility. By allowing them to tend to him, Warner embodies the flip side of the Good Samaritan parable.
Which he actually reads to the boy later, Luke 10.
Exactly. It demonstrates that genuine purpose is a reciprocal ecosystem. If you insist on always being the benefactor, you are hoarding the grace.
Sometimes you have to swallow your pride and let someone else have the privilege of blessing you. Vulnerability is the prerequisite for connection.
And because he allowed himself the humility of rest, his capacity is restored. He gets fresh boots, clean clothes, and steps back out.
Crossing into Michigan, the narrative shifts from generalized exhaustion to these highly concentrated, high-stakes encounters. Warner starts acting as a human anchor for people caught in the rapids of their own irreversible decisions.
We are moving into an exploration of how humans confront sin, shame, and the fear of exposure.
Let's analyze the Michigan encounters because they are basically vignettes examining shame.
And we should note, shame is distinct from guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am fundamentally irreparably bad. Shame thrives in darkness.
And the first encounter on the Greyhound bus is so tense. It's 6:06 p.m. in Fort Wayne. Warner uses his last $27 for a ticket to Grand Rapids.
And right as the doors are closing, Tammy bangs on the glass.
Yeah, this 20-year-old woman rushes on, drops into the seat next to Warner, totally breathless and terrified. She is physically running away from her life.
Fleeing to get an abortion because her boyfriend is aggressively pressuring her.
She feels trapped. She thinks her parents would disown her. She's just drowning in isolation.
Her fight-or-flight response is fully activated. When faced with a crisis that threatens our core identity, the instinct to flee geographically is overwhelming.
And Warner recognizes her panic is rooted in a misunderstanding of grace. He uses the story of Jonah trying to outrun God to show she can't outrun grace.
He shares 1 John 1.9 about confessing sins and finding forgiveness.
He's using that to actively dismantle her shame architecture. She thinks she's permanently severed from love, but Warner's quiet presence communicates that grace isn't fragile. It doesn't shatter over a mistake.
And notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't launch into a political or a moral debate about abortion. He doesn't shame her.
He just gently asks if she'd consider finding the courage to call her parents. He gives her the psychological space to stop running. And it works. She finds the strength to ask for help.
The narrative then sharply juxtaposes this terrified young woman with a man at the absolute opposite end of the power spectrum.
Lansing, Michigan, the state capitol building.
Right. Warner sits on a bench next to a politician. The guy is wearing an expensive suit, but he's slumped over, head in his hands. A portrait of a man drowning in moral compromise.
He literally confesses to Warner, I tell myself it's for the greater good, but lately, I can't sleep.
And I want to emphasize here, we are looking at this impartially.
Yes, absolutely. The text does not care what political party this man belongs to. Left wing, right wing, it is entirely agnostic.
We are strictly looking at the universal human element of crossing a boundary you swore you'd never cross.
It's the frog in the pot phenomenon of ethical decay. One small compromise for funding, another for an endorsement. You justify it by claiming you need to stay in power to do good.
But eventually, the rot sets in. The gap between your public persona of integrity and your private reality of corruption creates massive cognitive dissonance, which manifests as insomnia.
The psychological weight of a hidden life is crushing. The scripture here is Proverbs 28.13, concealing sins versus confessing them to find mercy.
Warner addresses the politician's core fear, that admitting fault equates to career annihilation. He reframes repentance not as punitive groveling, but as a turning.
Just changing direction.
Right. The divine expectation isn't flawless perfection, it is honesty. The truth, however damaging to a career, is the only antidote to the poison of concealment.
A turning. It implies agency. You're actively steering your life. From the Capitol, Warner goes to Ann Arbor, a high-pressure college town.
This encounter reflects a crisis that is all too common today.
It really is. Warner finds a college freshman standing on a pedestrian bridge at dusk, gripping the railing, staring at the dark water, openly weeping.
She is buckling under the suffocating weight of her parents' academic expectations.
She tied her entire worth to her GPA. She thinks she's failing, gonna be kicked out, and her life is functionally over.
This is a textbook example of cognitive distortion, specifically catastrophizing. Under chronic stress, the brain loses perspective.
A bad semester feels like permanent unlovability.
Exactly. The narrowing of perspective in youth makes the immediate crisis feel terminal. But Warner doesn't rush her. He maintains a non-threatening distance and speaks calmly.
He dismantles those false idols. Grades don't define you. Your parents' expectations don't define your inherent worth.
He brings her back from the abstract terror of the future into the grounded reality of the present.
Anchored by Psalm 34.18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. His steady conviction literally talks her off the ledge.
If we synthesize these three Michigan encounters, the pregnant woman, the politician, the overwhelmed student, despite their vastly different demographics, the root issue is identical.
It's a shame.
Yes, the deeply internalized belief that they are fundamentally broken. Warner neutralizes that shame, using his unshakable, silent presence. He just acts as a mirror reflecting unconditional grace.
Let's zoom out for a second. Up until now, Warner's MO has been movement. He walks, encounters a crisis, speaks truth, and keeps moving.
But approaching Detroit, that completely changes.
Right. The physical act of walking is replaced by the spiritual act of standing still,
The text leans heavily into the concept of spiritual warfare here.
which can sound kind of mystical, but let's look at the psychological components. As he nears the city limits, he feels this oppressive weight, intrusive thoughts telling him his efforts are useless, he's a fool, he should go back to California.
He is confronting the accumulated systemic despair of the environment. The temptation to abandon the mission is massive.
So how does he respond? He stops entirely. He initiates a severe fast. 3 days, no food or water.
Wait, 3 whole days?
Yeah, 3 days. He sits with the discomfort, wrestling with the doubt, and then he fasts for 3 more days.
Oh, wow. He's stripping away every physical comfort to fortify his mental resolve, putting on the armor of God from Ephesians 6.
And when he walks into the city, he encounters this busy street fair. Amidst the cotton candy and games, there's a large tent for a fortune teller, tarot cards, psychics, connecting with lost loved ones.
From Warner's theological perspective, anchored in 2 Corinthians 10.4-5, this isn't harmless entertainment. It represents deception.
Because people in pain want a shortcut.
Exactly. They want a psychic to give them an easy answer about the future rather than doing the excruciating work of facing the present. It's a stronghold preying on grief.
Now, a religious zealot might walk in, flip the tables, and cause a massive scene. Warner does none of that. He simply stands outside the tent, folds his hands, and prays silently.
Stubbornly.
Yes. And a grieving couple approaches the tent, but when they get near Warner, they suddenly feel an inexplicable uneasiness. They stop, thank Warner for a reason they can't articulate, and walk away from the tent.
And Warner looks not victorious, not triumphant, just obedient. It is the embodiment of a silent protest.
In our own lives, when we encounter toxicity, our first instinct is combat. We want to win the argument in the comment section.
Warner shows that sometimes the most potent action against a toxic system is to stubbornly, silently stand your ground in truth. You don't have to outshout the noise.
Which transitions perfectly into the winter pause. The brutal Michigan winter hits, and the roads literally freeze. Warner is forced to stop and takes a job as a farmhand for a harsh, skeptical woman named Joanne.
She explicitly tells him she doesn't trust drifters.
But she needs the labor. So he's waking up in the freezing pre-dawn dark, breaking ice in water troughs, mending fences. He's practicing the ministry of the mundane.
Which is so vital. Embodying faith through service rather than grand speeches. Like when he fixes the battery cables for that stranded mother and her kids using black electrical tape, praying Psalm 121 over the engine.
But the true crucible of the farm is his ego. He starts a Bible study in the drafty bunkhouse, sets up the folding chairs, prepares his notes, and on the first night, absolutely 0 people show up.
The chairs are completely empty.
Just the wind howling. If I'm Warner, I quit right there. We live in such an ROI culture. If I launch a podcast and nobody downloads it, I stop.
It's incredibly difficult for high achievers to sustain effort without visible metrics of success. The empty chairs are the ultimate test of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Is he doing it for an audience or because he's called to do it?
The psychology of doing the work in the dark is what separates fleeting passion from enduring purpose.
He doesn't complain. Next week, he sets the chairs up again, keeps waking up at 4 a.m. to feed the animals. He proves his reliability in the physical realm, which earns him the right to be heard in the spiritual realm.
And at a glacial pace, the room begins to fill.
Sam the cook, who is battling severe depression, finds a will to live. Tony finds authentic faith. Even Joanne, the hardened skeptic, is completely transformed by watching his relentless faithfulness.
The winter pause proves that obedience sometimes means staying put and being faithful in the absolute boring mundane.
But the spring thaw arrives, and Warner pushes eastward through New York State. and his understanding of connection evolves again.
Right, in Rochester, at the School for the Deaf.
Yeah, he watches the students communicate through sign language and realizes God isn't limited by sound. Faith doesn't require a booming voice. He shares Romans 8, and a teacher translates it into sign language. Pure, silent connection.
Then he moves through Albany, praying with a homeless vet and a frantic political aide, bridging vast socioeconomic gaps with empathetic presence.
Which finally brings him to the edge of the continent. The Bronx, New York City. The physical road runs out.
The sensory overload of the city. Sirens, towering apartment blocks, murals.
But the road doesn't tell him to turn around. It tells him to stay.
Because the Bronx represents the death of the itinerant ego. In psychology, there's the geographic cure, the false belief that moving to a new city will fix our internal unrest.
Warner's walk could have been that, just constantly seeking the next horizon to avoid putting down roots.
But in New York, he achieves ultimate stillness. He takes a bed in a soup kitchen, chopping vegetables and mopping floors.
And he forms these agonizingly slow, deep relationships. Like with Lewis, this bitter, hardened man who eats without making eye contact. He thinks he's burned every bridge in his life and is beyond grace.
Warner doesn't give him a lecture. He just stands next to him day after day, chopping vegetables. The ministry of proximity.
He shares 2 Corinthians 5.1 time, becoming a new creation, offering Lewis an alternative identity. And slowly, Lewis breaks down weeping right there by a mop bucket and eventually becomes a mentor to younger men.
And then there's Mike, the FDNY firefighter.
Oh, this story broke my heart. His alcoholism cost him his job. His wife left him. His kids won't speak to him. He says, I run into burning buildings for a living, but I let my own house burn down.
And Warner's approach here is a fascinating blend of empathy and rigid accountability. No coddling. He tells Mike a marriage is a covenant worth fighting for, but not with arguments.
He tells Mike to write a letter of confession to his wife, but explicitly forbids him from including a single word of defense. Any apology with a but is just an argument in disguise.
That is brilliant psychological advice.
Over months of grueling effort, Mike's family is painstakingly restored. So I have to synthesize this. Did Warner walk thousands of miles, survive tornadoes and bikers, just to chop onions in the Bronx?
Was it all just a preamble?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't a preamble. It was the necessary excavation of the man himself. By the time he reached the Bronx, the friction of the road had sanded away his ego and impatience. He was empty of himself so he could be full of grace.
He starts a Saturday prayer breakfast, a Wednesday Bible study, a Sunday church right there in the soup kitchen. The road didn't end, just found a place to root.
And that brings us to the most crucial part of this deep dive. Everything we've discussed about Warner DeVales isn't just literary analysis.
No, the author, Jeffrey Turner, didn't spin this out of thin air. The character is directly inspired by genuine, boots-on-the-ground street ministry.
Books 3 and 4 are being developed, but more importantly, they are establishing purpose ministries, currently securing their 501c3 nonprofit status.
Right now, Warner and the author are actively ministering to homeless populations in Sacramento and Las Vegas, applying this exact non-judgmental empathy to modern streets.
They literally plan to physically walk the roads mentioned in these books. The mission isn't just to sell books, it's to inspire people to help those in need in their own communities.
It challenges you listening. You don't need to walk across the country to fulfill your calling. Your road might be your corporate office cubicle.
Or your living room. Or the grocery store checkout line.
Warner realized every person is a divine appointment. So as you transition from this deep dive back into your reality, I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over.
The divine appointments.
Exactly. If you were to treat the very next stranger you interact with today, the barista, the person cutting you off in traffic, as a divine appointment placed in your path, how would it fundamentally alter the way you walk through your own life?
You don't always need a lightning bolt to find your destiny. Sometimes you just need to look deeply at the person standing right in front of you.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep walking your road, whatever it looks like. We'll see you next time.